2:15 a.m. The phone on my nightstand flashed relentlessly, its aggressive buzzing tearing through the silence of my Denver apartment. I am Courtney, a 30-year-old credit risk analyst. I woke up in a haze, reaching for the glowing device, and a sudden chill ran down my spine. The lock screen displayed exactly 36 missed calls and 47 voicemails. That specific volume of notifications at this hour only means one thing: a catastrophic emergency. My stomach dropped. The confusion quickly turned into absolute shock when I realized every single call was from my biological family. I accidentally tapped the screen, and the first voicemail started playing aloud. "You have to call us back right now, we are losing everything." The frantic, trembling voice filled the dark room. I stood frozen. My mind raced, torn between listening to whatever tragedy was unfolding or simply tossing the phone away. These were the exact same people who forced me to sign a paper permanently cutting off all family ties 12 years ago. For over a decade, they treated me as if I never existed. No birthdays, no check-ins, absolute silence. Now they were treating my phone like an emergency flare. Something was terribly wrong, but my professional instinct told me this was not just a sudden tragedy, it was a calculated trap. If you have ever experienced the deep betrayal of being abandoned by your own flesh and blood, only to have them crawl back when they desperately need something, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Join me as I uncover the shocking truth hidden inside those voicemails tonight. The memory of a stormy night 12 years ago rushed back with absolute clarity, hitting me as if it had just happened yesterday. I was only 18 at the time. My family's business was on the verge of a catastrophic collapse due to a massive financial data leak. Someone had exposed confidential client portfolios, and the company was facing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit that would have completely destroyed them. Instead of facing the consequences of their own negligence, my family needed a sacrificial lamb to appease the furious investors. They chose me. I had absolutely nothing to do with their company's daily operations. I did not even have access to their secure servers. Yet they fabricated a detailed narrative claiming I had downloaded the files to a personal drive. They placed the entire blame on my shoulders to shield themselves from legal ruin. That night, they called me into the home office. A formal legal document was already sitting on the heavy oak desk. They demanded I sign a binding agreement taking full responsibility for the data breach. But the paperwork did not stop there. The document included a strict severance clause. By signing it, I was legally renouncing any and all future inheritance rights to the family estate. I held the pen, realizing the people who were supposed to protect me were actively destroying my future to save their own wealth. They looked me dead in the eye and stated with zero hesitation that I was permanently stripped of my right to use the family name. I was no longer acknowledged as a member of their household. I was given exactly 10 minutes to pack a single bag. They kicked me out into the pouring rain completely empty-handed without a dollar to my name. I bought a one-way bus ticket and moved to Denver, Colorado, desperate to put as much distance between us as physically possible. The first few years were a grueling test of survival. I rented a tiny basement apartment and worked tough night shifts as a diner waitress, serving coffee at 3 in the morning just to pay my rent. During the day, I attended classes. Every single dollar I earned went directly toward my college tuition and basic survival. There were no safety nets, no emergency funds from parents. I built my life entirely from scratch, through sheer willpower and relentless effort. Over the course of 12 years, I transformed myself from an abandoned teenager into an independent, self-sufficient professional. I secured a position at a leading financial firm, working my way up to become a senior credit risk analyst. I spent my days investigating corporate fraud, dissecting financial anomalies, and protecting assets. I built a solid career, a perfect credit score, and a quiet, peaceful life. I never looked back. Then a few weeks ago, an envelope arrived in the mail at my new secure apartment complex. The return address made my blood run cold. It was a formal invitation to a family reunion. I had never shared my current address with anyone connected to my past. I immediately calculated the methods they could have used. They likely hired a professional skip tracer or tracked my professional licensing records online to locate my residence. I held the heavy cardstock in my hands, analyzing the sudden shift in their behavior. After 12 years of absolute silence and deliberate erasure, a sudden invitation does not stem from familial love or regret. I knew exactly what it was. It was a calculated trap. Without opening the RSVP card, I threw the entire envelope straight into the trash can. I assumed that would be the end of it. Early Sunday morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, and I finally decided to unlock my phone and listen to the voicemails to see exactly what kind of game they were playing. The notification counter remained frozen at a staggering number, but I methodically tapped the play button on the very first audio message. It was my father, Richard. His voice lacked the usual authoritative, condescending tone I remembered from my youth, replaced entirely by raw, unfiltered panic. He completely avoided mentioning any specific financial figures, debts, or actual facts. Instead, he relied on an urgent, demanding delivery to create an artificial sense of immediate crisis. "You have to call me back immediately. The family is in massive trouble, and you are the only one who can save us right now." The message ended abruptly. It was a classic high-pressure tactic designed to force a quick emotional reaction before the target has the necessary time to think and analyze the situation rationally. I skipped through 3 identical demands from my father and landed on the 5th voicemail in the queue. This one was from my mother, Cynthia. She opted for a completely different psychological strategy, utilizing heavy emotional manipulation to get her way. Through loud theatrical sobbing, she weaponized our biological connection to distort my perception of reality. "I know you are still angry about the past, but you are my flesh and blood. Please do not abandon your family in our time of need." Her attempt to gloss over a decade of cruel abandonment by reducing it to a simple, petty misunderstanding was highly calculated. The manufactured tears were specifically meant to break down my boundaries, replacing my logical reasoning with unfounded guilt. Before I could fully process her recording, a new text message pinged from an unsaved number, which I quickly identified from the profile picture as my Uncle Marcus. He did not bother with any polite greetings. Instead, he sent a low-resolution photograph of an official bank foreclosure notice. Crucial details like the account number, the debtor's name, and the total liability were deliberately blurred out, leaving only the ominous threat of impending property seizure visible. Below the image, Marcus attached a vicious text message threatening that if I turn my back on them now, the entire family would permanently fall apart, and the blame would rest entirely on my shoulders. The coordinated nature of this attack felt too structured, prompting me to check social media platforms for more context. Sure enough, my sister Dakota had already launched a public smear campaign. She posted a long, ambiguous status update playing the role of a devastated victim facing sudden, undeserved hardship. While she carefully avoided stating concrete facts, her words were heavily loaded with implications about ungrateful relatives who ruthlessly abandon their loved ones during crises. The comment section was already flooded with old acquaintances and distant relatives, tagging my profile, hurling insults, and aggressively questioning my morality. I sat quietly at my kitchen table, piecing together the frantic voicemails, Mom's manufactured tears, the partially obscured bank document, and Dakota's digital character assassination. The sheer scale of this coordinated desperation simply did not make sense. People do not orchestrate a multi-front harassment campaign involving extended relatives over a minor financial setback. They were actively trying to corner me into a blind commitment using a toxic mixture of urgency, guilt, and public shame. Something was fundamentally wrong with this entire scenario. My professional instincts as a risk analyst kicked into overdrive, warning me that reaching out to them directly would be a fatal error. I placed the phone face down on the granite counter, choosing absolute silence. I needed to investigate this massive anomaly entirely on my own terms. Exactly at 8 a.m. on Monday, I sat down at my workstation and began the process of verifying everything independently. I bypassed the emotional noise and logged directly into the annual credit report portal. I requested comprehensive disclosures from Experian and Equifax, utilizing my social security number to pull every shred of financial history tied to my identity. The screen loaded and I felt the blood drain from my face as the data populated. A massive commercial loan totaling $2.7 million sat at the very top of the list, currently flagged in deep default. I stared at the screen, unable to comprehend the sheer scale of the fraud. My credit file, which I had spent years carefully curating, was now a wreckage of severe delinquencies. I continued scrolling down, my hands trembling as I discovered 2 additional bridge loans and 4 premium credit cards, all opened under my name over the past 5 years. They had been maxed out to their absolute limits, with balances that had ballooned through compounding interest and late fees. "Are you okay? You look incredibly pale. Here, take a sip of water and try to breathe." My friend Sarah had noticed my sudden silence. She walked over to my desk, set a glass of water down, and placed a firm hand on my shoulder to help me regain some composure. I nodded in appreciation, but I could not speak. The betrayal was far deeper than I had anticipated. I needed to see where the capital had flowed. I navigated to the Colorado Secretary of State's business database, searched for the LLC name associated with the loan, and pulled the registration filing. It took only a few clicks to map the registered agent and the bank account linked to the business operations. Every single wire transfer from the loan disbursements had been routed into a personal holding account owned by Dakota. She had used my credit to fund her failing retail startup purchase, a high-end luxury vehicle, and finance multiple cross-country vacations under the guise of business development. The pieces fell into place with chilling precision. They had kept my personal documentation from the night I was thrown out of the house 12 years ago. They utilized my identity as a secret financial safety net, building an entire lifestyle on my stolen creditworthiness. The invitation to the family reunion I received weeks ago was never about reconciliation. It was a desperate, calculated move. They were drowning in debt and needed me to physically appear and sign a legal assumption of liability agreement, effectively transferring all their criminal debt onto my shoulders permanently. I printed every single page of the credit report, the LLC registration documents, and the bank statement logs. I created a physical binder organizing the evidence by date, lender, and transaction ID. The path forward was no longer a question of family or guilt. It was a matter of total legal survival. I locked the binder in my desk drawer and stood up. I had enough evidence to prove that I was the victim of long-term identity theft, and I would not allow them to drag me down with them. I cleared my monitor, closed all the financial portals, and made the call to schedule an emergency consultation with my attorney, Julian. I was not going to play their game any longer. The investigation was officially moving into a different phase. Late Monday afternoon, my phone rang again, signaling that they had grown tired of waiting for a callback. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and hit the answer button, ready to dismantle their facade piece by piece. My father, Richard, was the one on the line. He started with a forced, gentle tone, feigning concern as if nothing had happened over the last few days. He rambled on about how tough the economy had become for their business, painting himself as a victim of sudden, uncontrollable market shifts. After a few minutes of theatrical suffering, he finally pivoted to his true motive. "Courtney, we know you have worked hard and secured a stable life. You have a valuable apartment now, and we are just asking you to sign a temporary collateral agreement. It is only to help the family get through this rough patch. Once the business recovers, we will release you from the burden." I cut him off before he could continue his scripted performance. My voice was steady, completely devoid of the hesitation they expected. I read aloud the specific institutional names of the lenders and the unique reference numbers for each fraudulent loan file I had extracted that morning. I dismantled their narrative of business hardship by detailing exactly how the identity theft had been orchestrated, documenting the use of my social security number to bypass credit underwriting protocols. Before Richard could formulate a defense, my mother Cynthia snatched the device. She bypassed any attempt at logic, choosing instead to lean entirely into emotional coercion. She shrieked, berating me for my lack of filial loyalty. She insisted that because they had raised me, I owed them my life, my assets, and my silence. How can you be so cold after everything we sacrificed to raise you? This is how you repay your own parents. It is your duty to stand by us when we are failing. Then Dakota grabbed the phone. Her initial approach was a pathetic whimpering plea, but when I remained unmoved, her tone curdled into pure malice. She began to sob uncontrollably, claiming she had nowhere else to turn, before quickly shifting to a series of frantic accusations. She threatened to stage a public spectacle, claiming she would do something drastic and leave behind a note that would ensure the media destroyed my reputation and my career. You have no idea what you are doing to this family. If you do not sign those papers, I will make sure everyone knows you are the reason we lost everything. You will be the villain in this story, and you will never hold a job in this industry again. I interrupted her hysteria with a calm, clinical delivery. I informed them that every single word they had uttered since the start of this conversation was being recorded. I explicitly stated that I would not pay a single cent toward any debt they had manufactured through criminal deception. I told them that the era of using me as their secret financial reservoir had reached an absolute, non-negotiable end. I dismissed their threats as the desperate gasps of people facing inevitable consequences. With one final decisive action, I tapped the screen to end the call, effectively severing their lifeline to my life. On Wednesday morning, I arrived at the downtown office of my lawyer, Julian. I carried a heavy, structured binder containing every piece of evidence I had gathered, including the organized bank statements, the LLC registration documents, and the time-stamped voice recordings from my most recent calls. Julian sat across from me, his expression grim, as he systematically reviewed the material. He cross-referenced the fraudulent loan disbursements with the transaction logs I had pulled from the Colorado Secretary of State's database. He confirmed that the evidence of systemic identity theft was overwhelming, establishing a clear link between my stolen Social Security number and the massive debt obligations. We need to create an official paper trail that links these accounts to criminal activity. We will start by filing a formal report with the FTC to obtain an identity theft case number, then take those credentials directly to the local police precinct to file a criminal complaint. Following his guidance, we accessed the Federal Identity Theft Report portal. I provided every detail regarding how my personal data had been exploited without my consent. Within minutes, the system generated a unique case file which functioned as my primary defense in every subsequent interaction with creditors. With this official federal verification in hand, we headed to the local police station to file a formal criminal complaint. I walked the officer through the timeline, explaining exactly how my family had used my identity as a long-term financial instrument. The officer recorded the statements and provided a formal incident report, which was essential for challenging the debt collectors. Once we secured the official police documentation, Julian moved to the next critical phase of the plan. He instructed me to forward a comprehensive package, including the FTC case number and the police report, to the fraud departments of Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. This forces them to trigger a mandatory fraud alert on your file. Any creditor attempting to pull your report will now be blocked unless they undergo a rigorous verification process. It effectively shuts down their ability to open new accounts in your name. While I handled the credit bureaus, Julian drafted a formal legal notice addressed to the executive leadership of the bank that held the commercial loan. He cited the specific statutes regarding the use of fraudulent identity documentation to secure financial contracts. The letter contained a stern demand. The bank was required to cease all collection attempts immediately and initiate a thorough internal forensic investigation into the signature authenticity on the loan application. The strategy was aggressive and uncompromising. We were not merely asking for debt relief, we were compelling the financial institutions to recognize that the contracts were legally void from the beginning due to criminal origin. As I walked out of the law office, I felt a sense of clarity for the first time in weeks. I had successfully transitioned from a passive victim into an active participant in my own legal defense. The burden of proof was now shifting, and the institutions that had been blindly collecting interest on stolen credit were about to face a very different set of consequences. Nearly a month later, the internal investigation initiated by the bank, now operating in tandem with the local police, began to close in on the perpetrators. The authorities summoned Richard, Cynthia, and Dakota for questioning, executing a strategic move to interrogate each of them separately. By separating them, the investigators effectively eliminated their ability to coordinate a consistent lie, forcing them to rely solely on their own self-preservation instincts. Richard and Cynthia were the first to enter the interrogation rooms. As the evidence of their deep involvement was presented, their unified front crumbled instantly. They saw the overwhelming documentation, the bank signatures, the wire transfer trails, and the digital logs, and panicked. They chose to save themselves by throwing their own daughter under the bus. "We had absolutely nothing to do with this. It was entirely her idea." Dakota took the papers out of the family safe and used them to secure those loans without our knowledge or consent. "We are completely innocent in this matter." When the investigators brought Dakota in and informed her of her parents' testimony, her reaction was explosive. She immediately realized that her parents were sacrificing her to escape the severe federal consequences of the identity theft charges. Feeling abandoned and cornered, she launched a fierce counterattack to mitigate her own sentencing. She provided the investigators with a series of archived text messages and email chains that explicitly proved Richard and Cynthia were the ones who had originally provided my social security number. She demonstrated that they were not just aware of the fraud, but were the active architects who had instructed her on how to execute every fraudulent application. My own parents handed me the data and told me to proceed with the applications. Now that the authorities are involved, they are trying to put all the blame on me. I have the logs that prove they were orchestrating this from the start. The interrogation room became a chaotic scene of ruthless finger-pointing and desperate recriminations. Every lie they had built to sustain their fraudulent lifestyle began to dissolve under the pressure of the investigation. The investigators recorded every accusation and every desperate attempt to shift blame, successfully compiling enough evidence to justify the criminal indictments for each of them. The news of their systematic betrayal eventually leaked out to the wider circle of extended family and mutual acquaintances. Those who had previously hounded me with accusations of ingratitude on social media suddenly went silent. As the details of the criminal charges and their internal conflicts surfaced, the collective narrative shifted instantly. Friends, business partners, and distant relatives who had once blindly supported them realized they had been manipulated by a family of grifters. One by one, they began distancing themselves, effectively ostracizing Richard, Cynthia, and Dakota. The social status and reputation they had spent decades trying to maintain were obliterated in the span of a single afternoon, leaving them entirely isolated as they faced the impending weight of the legal system. Several months later, as the final legal proceedings concluded, the cold, practical consequences of their actions finally crashed down upon those who had once cast me aside. The bank formally executed the foreclosure order. The family home, which had served as the stage for their facade of prosperity, was stripped of its status. Heavy chains secured the main gates, and the high-end vehicles that had been purchased with fraudulent funds were towed away by repossession teams. The life they had built on the foundation of stolen credit evaporated in a single day. Richard, Cynthia, and Dakota faced total financial insolvency. With their assets liquidated to settle a fraction of the outstanding debts, they lost everything. They were forced to relocate from their suburban residence to a cramped, low-rent apartment on the outskirts of the city while awaiting their court dates for the criminal charges. The social standing they had obsessed over was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of their pending legal reckoning. As for me, the impact was vastly different. I received official notification from the 3 major credit bureaus that the fraudulent accounts had been permanently purged from my file. My credit score, which had been dragged into the dirt by their criminal exploitation, began to climb steadily back toward a healthy range. The weight of the debt that had threatened to capsize my professional future was lifted. I was finally free to manage my own finances without the fear of unauthorized access or hidden liabilities emerging from the shadows of my past. I took the final step of changing my phone number, ensuring that no further attempts at emotional manipulation or empty apologies could disrupt my peace. I closed the door on that toxic chapter of my life with absolute finality, choosing not to offer a single shred of forgiveness. There would be no second chances, no reconciliation, and certainly no contact. Looking back at this entire ordeal, the most profound lesson I have learned is that bloodline is never a guarantee of loyalty or integrity. Sometimes the people who share your DNA are the first to push you into the abyss to protect their own interests. Cutting off contact with a toxic family is not an act of selfishness. It is the most essential form of self-preservation. You are never obligated to sacrifice your future, your reputation, or your mental health to pay for the greed and deceit of others. True family is earned through actions not dictated by biology. Thank you all for sticking by me and listening to this story until the very end. Your support throughout this journey has meant a great deal to me. Please leave a comment sharing your thoughts on how this situation was resolved, or tell us about your own experiences in setting firm boundaries with toxic relationships. I truly value hearing your perspectives.